far more than we have in Belgium. And you also have very ambitious projects with regard to offshore wind. And there are a lot of European companies also interested and looking into what you are doing, and we are very happy to share the expertise and build this way together, because we don't need to come together only at European level, but also worldwide. We need friends around the world, because the war in the Ukraine has learned us that not everyone is a good friend, and that you have to choose your trading partners very carefully. And this energy transition is not only about electricity alone, about green hydrogen alone. It's about value chains. It's about controlling the value chain. It's about protecting ourselves. And so that means that if we work together with regard to offshore wind, we also create a good relationship with terms to value chains, and that we have to think further ahead, for example, with regard to critical minerals. When it was COP26, David Attenborough took the floor, took the stand, and he said that the generation before us, that what we have done to the Earth is a real catastrophe. But he said that if a generation, if a population could do such destructive things, then this generation also can solve it, and that we can be the biggest problem solvers that ever existed. That's also my mindset. My mindset is that what we are facing, that we should see this as the biggest opportunity ever that comes our way. And why? Because we need to make lives better for our citizens and also for our industries. And we can do that by offering security. And offering security, we do it to invest in renewable energies, because wind and sun you cannot weaponize. So I'm very looking forward for all your questions, and I hope that I can answer all of them, and that by the end of this session that we have learned a lot from each other. Thank you.
Madam Minister. Madam Minister, thank you so much. There's really hardly anything better than fries, beer and chocolate, but if it's all produced using clean energy, it will taste that much better.
Yeah,
so
you
wonderful.
know, used cooking oils are a far better thing for fueling your car than what we are doing now.
Absolutely, particularly with the price of diesel where it is right now. I'm sure that the biodiesel market in Belgium, from all the deep frying of potatoes, is very robust.
Absolutely.
Well, that's not the topic of this conversation today, but if we wanted to talk about French fries, I'm sure we could do so for the next 45 minutes or so. But I want to talk a little bit about what you were discussing up there, and then of course we'll take questions from the audience, both in person and virtually. You talked about the green power plant, the energy islands in the North Sea. I'd love to talk about interconnecting the offshore wind resources of several countries into one grid. What are the challenges to making that happen, and then and how do you overcome those? Yeah,
the challenges are working together and try to understand each other. And the challenge is that all these projects start with bilateral agreements. The four-country project was also starting from a bilateral agreement between Denmark and Belgium. But we cannot see this as just a bilateral agreement. Because if we would do so, and if we would add bilateral agreement on bilateral agreement, we will miss out on molecules that can be on electrons that can be produced. We should exploit every inch of the North Sea that we can exploit, knowing that production of electricity is not the only thing we do in the North Sea. We also have fisheries, for example. We also have military areas within the North Sea. We have critical infrastructure, so we have to do careful planning what we are doing. And so that means careful planning means that we should bring more countries than two countries together, and that we should create a meshed grid, and so also different countries together. And so a challenge is that how are we going to manage this? And so we all have our individual grid operators, and maybe we should look for a grid operator for the North Sea. And so this is a big challenge that we try to overcome. And how do we overcome it? To keep the conversation going and talk a lot to each other, and to understand each other so that we can move forward. I try to work bottom up, more or less bottom up, and not only top down. If you work top down, and sometimes you lose a lot of time.
Got it, got it. That sounds incredibly challenging, but ultimately quite rewarding. What is the time frame on this set of projects? How long do you think it'll take to get something that's, the phase one, and then where does it go from here?
Yeah, so the phase one being Belgium and Denmark, our time frame is 2030. So in our part, the Belgian part of the North Sea, we are now developing a second zone. We will quadruple our capacity. Before the war, we tripled. We had a decision to triple, and then the war made us to revise our ambitions, and we will be quadrupling our installed capacity. And that intended time frame is 27-28 for the first wind turbines to become operational, and then 2030 to be fully completed, and in connection with Denmark 2030-2032. But we are doing the same thing with the UK, with United Kingdom. So that means 2030. That means tomorrow. In energy, you always need long time frames, but I'm quite confident that we will get there.
Fantastic. Now, you talked about building out the entire North Sea as much as you can, of course, taking into account all of the fisheries, the military issues, et cetera. What do you see as the challenges to building energy and offshore wind in as much of the North Sea as possible?
Yes. Stakeholder management, because we have a lot of functions within the North Sea, for example, fisheries, but also biodiversity. Also, specifically in our part of the North Sea, we have an area that's called Natura 2000. That means that it needs conversation. So we are doing a lot of thinking about nature inclusive design. And to combine these different functions of the North Sea, but also critical infrastructure with regards to the military issues, also cybersecurity, because we know that these critical infrastructure can also be vulnerable for cyber attacks, for example. And so bringing these stakeholders together and to make a robust regulatory framework is something that is challenging, and also when I hear myself talking is very challenging, but we have a fairly good track record on this, and we know that these processes take time, but if you do a good stakeholder management, that you arrive at the result that you can work with.
I'm glad you mentioned cybersecurity. The Atlantic Council is putting out a paper next month on cybersecurity and the energy transition, and how the diffusion of energy assets and the digitalization of energy assets make cyber a bigger risk, and so something that needs to be addressed right away. So we'll be sure to send that to you when it's all done.
But if I can give a good example for that, was connecting the Ukraine electricity grid to the European electricity grid. This was something that was discussed for years. And just before the Russian invasion, the Ukraine electricity grid was deconnected and operated in isolation mode, and this was kind of a test. It was a few days before the Russian invasion. The Russians invaded, and so the Ukraine decided to not reconnect to the Russian grid. And so it requested the European Union to connect to Europe. This was an outstanding question for so many years. It was never solved for reasons of cybersecurity, but the fact that there was a war going on made our TSOs to work together as never before and to solve these issues. So I'm also convinced that if we take this threat seriously, but really seriously, that this is a vulnerable issue, then we can also address it. And if we can address it, then we can move forward.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic. And that it was a remarkable story to see
Absolutely.
the Ukraine grid connected to the EU grid. You talked, I want to go back a little bit, you talked about the environmental stewardship, the stakeholder management, getting the regulatory frameworks, the environmental assessments, right, my pen. How is there a way of streamlining this, because the scale you're trying to work at is so large? Is there a way of streamlining these processes so that it happens faster? Or is it really the kind of thing where each area, each project has to be done on its own?
No, we have the North Sea countries work together in the North Sea Energy Cooperation, which is basically the 10 North Sea countries together. Also with Norway, for example, not a member of the European Union, and I also hope that the United Kingdom will join us back within NSEC, so the North Sea Energy Corporations, and this brings us together. This is a way of streamlining because we have an exchange of good practices. And also at national level, but I think in every country it's the same thing, that you have different departments and that you have to create working groups and other things to align also interests of different stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. Really, really, really interesting. Do you think that this project could provide a roadmap for achieving economies of scale for offshore wind in regions beyond Europe? Is this something that other regions should be looking to?
Absolutely, and we have seen the Belgian companies. We have a very small coastline, 67 kilometers, which is very small.
Yeah.
But we were one of the front runners. We were the first countries to invest massively in offshore wind. So that means that we have now industries with a lot of expertise, and then we see that they export their expertise, that they are building offshore wind farms worldwide, within Europe, also outside Europe. One of our crown jewels, the dredging company Tinne, is one of the contractors for one of for the US offshore wind farms coming up, and we are very proud that we are sending out our industries, and they have learned in the North Sea, which is a very challenging sea. They have learned, they bring this expertise with them, and they will learn here also. So this is, if you be a front runner, it's always to your advantage, and that can also, that will be to your advantage too.
Well, the U.S. is maybe a little bit behind Europe, but we're going to catch up on offshore wind. We've talked a lot about the grid piece of this, but how does green hydrogen fit into this plan?
The green hydrogen is an ideal complement for green electricity, and also when you have surpluses, and that you can use the green electricity to make hydrogen out of it. We see that in Denmark, in Germany, also in the Netherlands, that they have, in the four of us, these three countries, they have huge surpluses, and that they are complementing, that they have a hydrogen strategy that's also based on using offshore wind electricity to make hydrogen out of it. In Belgium, we won't do it because we don't have the space available, and we need every electron to use for direct electrification. But both of them will be complementary. Also means it's also a way of protecting ourselves because that means that we don't need to import all of our green hydrogen.
Right.
But in the North Sea, we cannot produce all the green hydrogen we will need in our industrial zone. So we will need trade partners outside Europe too for green hydrogen.
Now, if you're just using capacity that would otherwise be curtailed, do you produce enough of that electricity to make the costs go down? I mean, right now, as I understand it, if the electrolyzer is not being used at pretty much 24/7, that the costs are just too high for that.
Yeah, that's an issue, and that's what project developers come back to us saying that this is something that we should address in the regulatory framework. As in Belgium, for our offshore winds, is only electricity? I say yes, and I think not my problem to solve. But I know this is a real issue. Hydrogen is not the only answer for avoiding curtailment. Flexibility and storage is also important. Flexibility and storage onshore, for example. And what we see in Belgium is that we have development of large-scale, grid-scale batteries, 100 megawatts at this point, but also investments announced for 200 megawatt batteries. And these are also ideal to combine with offshore wind so that we can use the wind even if the wind is not blowing.
Got it. So Belgium will not be producing hydrogen from offshore wind. Will there be any hydrogen production from onshore facilities or?
Yes, but our targets for domestic hydrogen production are really low. It's like 100 or 150 megawatts. We have done an assessment, and we don't have the resource. We have a clear ambition for green hydrogen, and we don't have enough resources to produce the green electricity. So it will be a lot better and cheaper to ship the sunshine from, for example, Oman to Belgium under the form of ammonia.
Yeah, of course. That's going to be a really interesting trajectory to watch over the next decade or so, as you see all these hydrogen projects coming online all over the world, and where that hydrogen goes. It's going to be fascinating. Can we talk a little bit about the energy security question?
Yes.
You raised that in your talk. There's some concern. There's at least some quarters here in the United States that are worried that a focus too much on the energy transition could undermine energy security goals. How do you see the relationship between energy security and climate action?
Yeah, I don't share that position. Although I try to listen to it very carefully, because I think we cannot lose energy not listening to each other. But even then, the wind and sun cannot be weaponized. So the best way to protect ourselves in terms of energy security is to invest in renewable energy. But we must also acknowledge that there is a transition pathway, and that at least in the short, but also in the medium term, that this will be backed up by fossil fuels that are flexible, like, for example, gas-fired plants. But we can make sure that these have less running hours if we increase at the same time our renewable electricity. What's much forgotten in the equation is flexibility and intelligence, and also artificial intelligence, and also digitalization. If we can use, if our electric cars and heat pumps, if they are smarter than they are today, and if we can capture this intelligence, then we reduce our need for capacity. And this is something that in Belgium we are working a lot on, because we need a lot of energy and a lot of electricity, and we don't have any natural resources, so we have to do other things, and that's why we have a strong focus on that. And it's complex, but we are good in complex engineering also at the regulatory level.
Got it.
So I don't think that the climate agenda, we shouldn't see the climate agenda as some separate agenda, but we should include it in what comes our way. So it's not because we have a war going on now that we must forget about climate. It's not one or the other. It's two crises at the same time, and we have to tackle them together. And if we see it as one, as a whole, in fact, this will be the way out.
Got it. Thank you. That's heartening to hear. You mentioned that there will be the continued need for gas over the course of the transition, and it brings me to the first question from our virtual audience. And so, again, if you're out in the audience, please post questions through the Q&A function on Zoom. This one comes from Alice Wells at ExxonMobil, and she notes that ExxonMobil is participating in a multi-stakeholder carbon capture and storage project at the port of Antwerp, which could potentially capture 8 million metric tons of CO2 annually by 2030, a 50% reduction in the area's CO2 emissions. How does CCS feature in Belgium's energy transition planning?
Yeah, the CCS will be an integral part of the solution, and I would want to thank ExxonMobil for the project they have on the table, specifically also in Belgium, because it will be crucial for these industries to move forward on the path to carbon neutrality. Also, it is my strong belief and my true conviction that we cannot achieve carbon neutrality without our industries. Our industries provide solutions, provides materials, products and half products for the energy transition. So that means that we need our industries. If we don't have these materials, these products, these half products, we cannot insulate our homes, we cannot build wind turbines. And the same goes for refineries. And we are looking into Belgium in projects like co-processing, like decreasing the part of fossil and increasing renewable. The used cooking oils, for example, comes back into play. And so I'm very happy that we have such projects on CCS. And I know we have work to do at the regulatory framework. This will be done at the European level and is strongly supported by Belgium.
Got it. Thank you. In your opening remarks, you mentioned critical minerals and the supply chain for clean energy technologies, which is a energy security risk, though very different, not nearly as acute as the risk that is posed by Russian gas. How do you think through the energy transition materials supply chain in your energy transition strategy?
Yes, it's something that is at this moment, if I'm being frank and open, that is underdeveloped, and that's also why I mention this, because this is very high on my agenda. That we should take this more seriously than we do it today. Specifically, when we learn from the Russian crisis, if we see decisions that we have made in Europe in the past. Pipelines we constructed and thinking that we had a friend next door. Maybe, and it's with hindsight, I know, and it's always easy also afterwards, but this was maybe not the best thing to do. And if we see the need for materials that we need also in renewable energy, then we cannot make the same mistake again. And so that's why we also need to make use of our organizations that we have, like the International Energy Agency, for example, for which critical minerals is also high on the list, to have a good policy design, also in terms of security. That we cannot afford that these value chains are being exported or controlled by nations that we think of as not so secure.
Yeah, of course. But you did talk about the need for grid scale batteries, et cetera, as part of the plan. So it's very much something that needs to be addressed.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's to avoid curtailment, and it's also, if we have these grid scale batteries, we avoid curtailment, but we also can do some. We create stability, and the market will be calm. I'm not a firm believer that we should have high prices and scarcity pricing to attract investments. We will attract investments if the water is calm, and batteries and flexibility and storage is a way to keeping the water calm. We know renewable energy, it comes with the weather, it comes with the sun, with wind. So this is unpredictable. It's predictable, but it's not predictable like nuclear power is predictable. It's in another way predictable. So we should deal with this less predictability, and then you have to have a storage solution, and this can be water power, pumped storage, for example, what we have in Belgium, but we are not Norway. So batteries is the best thing to do.
So you mentioned nuclear power. I told you beforehand I wouldn't ask you questions about it, but I just didn't want to say that I thought it was great that Belgium decided to keep those 2 nuclear power plants online and extend their life. At this moment, just seems the absolute right decision, no matter whatever you think about nuclear. Now, we've got a lot of questions coming in from the audience, so I want to go to one from Rennie Myers at Ørsted, who asks, what tender design do you foresee for the build-out of Belgium's next wind zone? Are you hoping to integrate programmatic priorities like biodiversity and industry-wide decarbonization into that tender?
I think that Ørsted is using an advantage to have some information.
She's right here live in the studio.
Okay, so, maybe we can take this up. And then for the people that don't know why I'm laughing, is that we will decide on the regulatory framework in the weeks to come. So everyone is very curious, what are they going to do? But yes, biodiversity will be an important topic, as will be citizen participation, for example. And we are looking into a setup which will be a combination of citizen and corporate PPAs.
Got it. You heard it here first. Okay. From an anonymous attendee, what investments into the maritime industry have been fundamental to the build-out of the offshore wind industry in the EU and for Belgium?
Sorry, I didn't.
What investments into the maritime industry have been fundamental to the build out of the offshore wind industry in the EU and for Belgium.
But in the maritime industry?
Maritime, so the shipping, the ships, maritime construction, offshore construction, the whole.
Yeah, let me answer the question by telling you an anecdote. Over a year, just in June last year, I was the godmother of a new vessel for DEME, the Groene Wind, which is a vessel for maintenance of offshore wind, which was specifically designed to avoid sliding steps for people who do the maintenance of the wind turbines. So it's with a huge bridge that they can walk up to the wind turbine so that it's a lot safer. This was specifically designed for maintenance, better maintenance of wind turbines. We've seen that the evolution is so quick that vessels sometimes they cannot make up. This was 1 year ago, and a month ago I went to another naming ceremony from the same company, and it was like the vessel. I smashed the champagne, so small. So this has, and it's offshore wind, but it's for offshore in general. So it's also decommissioning of existing oil platforms, and so the investments in maritime in vessels, it's a whole value chain. It's a whole value chain.
What about port infrastructure?
Same thing, and what we see, and that's the same goes for hydrogen. And I see port development around the world now in light of development and of hydrogen. So when we went to Oman to sign a government-to-government MOU with Oman for green hydrogen, it was centered around port infrastructure. So ports are essential. So for energy, ExxonMobil is also in Antwerp, in the port. It's the gateway to an economy. And so that also means that when we are now building infrastructure for hydrogen, but also for electricity, our focus is also on port areas.
Got it. So there's lots of work to be done here. What are the labor implications for this really big ambition for offshore wind, offshore energy?
Yeah, labor and also education. We don't have enough skilled people at different skills level, from engineers to just labor people going up in the wind turbines for maintenance. So we have a huge challenge for our young people. For boys and girls, and that we should be better in science, in techniques, and this is in Belgium a specific point of attention.
Mm-hmm. What are you doing to address that? I mean, not you personally.
Yes.
What is Belgium doing to address that? Just given that if that we wouldn't want that to be what holds us back from reaching net zero, is not having the labor force to achieve those goals.
Yeah. We are putting a lot of effort and not we as I, because at my level of government we are not competent, but never mind. As a country we put a lot of effort in what we call STEM, and STEM is specific. It's for I think it's high school here, but for boys and girls between 12 and 18, that they have a lot of science and techniques already when they go to school. For example, my girl, she's now 11, and she's far more than I at the same age, more confronted and in another way of schooling to bring science as at a whole different level within the school curriculum. It's also about having good teaching staff and also passion, and that it's not that mathematics and physics is not something that is boring and difficult, but solution oriented.
Got it. Now, you alluded to this before, but I want to ask more directly about energy efficiency as part of this solution. How is energy efficiency playing into your energy strategy, both in terms of very short term to help meet the current energy challenge, but also over the long term, where if you look at IEA's scenario, a net zero scenario, the world has many more people, but uses actually less energy by 2050.
Yes.
So how do you think through that? And particularly on that short term question, where you look out to next winter, there's some potential real challenges.
On the short term, this is a question of security, because we have decided at European level on an oil ban. And also we are not so keen for Russian gas, although we have not an official ban. But reality is also that we don't have that much spare capacity around the world. So the only short-term solution is to bring consumption down in the short term. And there are easy and quick fixes. Like, for example, speed limits, but also smart thermostats. We have, at our level of government, decided on a VAT decrease on solar panels, on renovation, so to push people, or to give them an extra incentive to do these investments, to have also upfront cash, because every solar panel on the roof is giving a better protection. But energy efficiency is and working on the demand side. Is a real important one. Half of our domestic gas in Belgium is for half of the gas that we need is for domestic heating. So that's the challenge.
Yeah, but a huge opportunity.
A huge opportunity. So we are looking into insulation on the one hand and replacing gas by heat pumps on the other hand. That's why we need a lot of electricity, and that's why we are doing offshore wind in the North Sea.
How much can you get done on that over, say, the next 6 months, realistically?
On the next, we have seen that consumption has gone down. Because people are confronted with high energy bills. All of us in Europe have done information campaigns with little tips and tricks how to reduce consumption. And the IEA 10-point plan on oil and on gas indicates that there is a room for improvement.
Is there any political pushback or pushback from the population for some of these where you're asking people to sacrifice, whether that's driving slower or turning the thermostat down in the winter a degree or two? Is there any potential political risk there? Or
this is yes, and this is not only related to the war going on. This is in general when we are talking about environmental policies. So this is in general when we are talking climate change, but also energy. This is also it's easily framed as a behavioral change, and it also is, but it sometimes makes policymakers afraid. Oh, we don't dare to tell that you should lower your speed. So we need maybe more openness and also more audacity to address these issues.
Yeah. I just have a hard time imagining asking people in certain parts of the United States to drive slower. So I just want, as we have some challenges, of course, here in the United States, they're not as acute, but just thinking through that, you could just imagine a lot of political pushback.
Yes, but driving is maybe a very specific example, but just putting the temperature 1 degree lower helps a lot.
Yeah,
helps a lot. So we can start with that also.
Is the oil ban politically popular in Belgium?
It's strongly supported. Gas ban also, although there is no official, but we are facing the war that's going on and solidarity with Ukraine is a strong support, strong political and also public support for helping the Ukraine. That's fantastic.
We have another question from the audience. It's more on a technical question, so moving away from some of these political ones. This could be political, maybe. What is the barrier for large-scale adoption of batteries as a storage solution? So back to the batteries.
The barrier.
Are there any barriers to the adoption? And if there aren't, why aren't we doing more and more of it?
In fact, we removed the barriers.
All barriers are gone.
No, we have designed, over the last year, we have designed a capacity remuneration mechanism, and we had some positive parameters for batteries, So to push for larger batteries, I've seen now that we have 200 megawatt projects being developed. So that means we can see it from a barrier angle, but the opposite side is that if you can create a stable regulatory framework, then you will create also a secure framework for investments to happen. And it was our firm belief that we needed these batteries, so we created a framework in which they could be developed. For the barriers we are facing in Belgium is maybe our market design, but we are tackling this. But the data needs to be exchanged also at different levels. We need a lot of more intelligence in the system, the flexibility that needs to be used. So that's, I think, at this moment, a barrier, or mainly a barrier that we cannot use, or that we cannot take everything out of it that can be done with batteries. So we can go further, and then it's in our market design, more or less.
Can you tell us more about the remuneration mechanism and how that works? Because that seems really interesting.
Yes, it begins with an assessment of our adequacy. It begins with looking to Belgium, but not as an island, also with surrounding countries, that at peak moments, so typically in winter between 6 and 8 in the evening, if you have enough generating capacity to address peak demand. That's the first thing. The conclusion was we don't have enough capacity. And why? Because we are phasing out nuclear. This was not replaced. We didn't have any investments. We have investments in offshore wind, but it's for security of supply, not always. It's not providing a baseload. So, okay, we have a gap. And then the second question is, will the market solve this gap, yes or no? Will the market attract these investments, yes or no? And the conclusion was no, also because of the fact that renewables will increase, and so that prices are too low to have these investments being made viable. And that's the reason. And then we said the capacity remuneration mechanism is the right thing to do. And that means that if it's via an auction, so we auction the capacity that we need, and people who are putting in the lowest price will get the project awarded. So it's a mean, our capacity remuneration mechanism is at the one hand to secure supply, it's about security of supply, but at the other hand also a flexibility market. So we have attracted batteries in this capacity remuneration mechanism, but also gas-fired power plants that can be flexible and go along with renewable electricity production. So I don't like to see it as just a mechanism to replace nuclear power plants, which is often framed like this in Belgium. But it is a market design, it's a flexibility market, and we need flexibility if we want to go to 100% renewable energy by 2050.
That's fascinating and a really, really interesting initiative. And you're seeing it already generating projects?
Absolutely. So we had a first auction last year in October. It was a very challenging one because when I came into office there was nothing. And being a European country, that means that you need approval at state aid, so you need approval from the European Commission. This typically takes 18 months. I did it in 10 months' time. And we got it approved in August when the first auction was in September. And then this was a very successful auction. We had more projects than we needed, so we could attract a good project and secure our supply at a very affordable price.
Got it. Well, congratulations. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
I have two more questions for you, and then if we have any more from the audience. So they're both somewhat political in nature, but very much tied to the technical aspects of the energy system. So I hope we can sort of touch on both parts of it. So the first one is on green hydrogen and the additionality question. And how do you view the requirement for the additionality requirement, so needing to build more renewable capacity for for every megawatt of green hydrogen that that electrolyzer you're adding to the grid. On the one hand, I see that as making sense because we're trying to decarbonize the grid, and so you don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul by taking electrons away from the grid. On the other hand, you want to incentivize the green hydrogen industry and really help accelerate that, because that's going to be a really crucial part of the energy system going forward. So how do you think about balancing those two desires?
There was an interesting report from IRENA, who had maps in it with where you need the hydrogen, so countries with large manufacturing industries, and where you have cheap green electricity, like countries with an abundance of sun and wind. Mm-hmm. And these are on opposite sides of the world. So it's an illusion that we can produce all of our hydrogen domestically, meaning in Europe. So we need an import strategy, but we also need to learn from Russia, so that we cannot, and who are our trading partners. And this reframes a bit also the question. But additionality is, I'm not opposed to green hydrogen projects in the North Sea. Certainly not if you have projects like in Denmark, and you can. We are looking into 300 gigawatts of electricity capacity in the North Sea. So of course hydrogen will be part of the puzzle, but it will be but let's not forget, our energy use will decrease, but electricity will increase.
Yes,
electrification in transport, electrification also in heating our homes. So we should not underestimate the amount of electricity that we need. And so I'm maybe also a bit biased being Belgian and knowing that we cannot afford to do both at the same time, but I'm very prudent, and my conservative approach is that first electricity, then hydrogen. Knowing that we have countries like Oman, but also Chile, on different sides of the world, when we can produce green electricity in massive quantities. So this can bring us together also from different parts of the world. How
are the economics of shipping hydrogen shaping out? How does that look to you?
It was in the same IRENA report. It was laid out you have pipelines over X kilometers versus shipping. But the first projects that will come online, like for example the project in Oman, it's already with a time horizon 25-26. This will be ammonia. But we have in Belgium life sciences, we have chemics that needs also huge quantities of ammonia. We should not forget that we have answers right in front of us, renewable energy, also green hydrogen, but we must not be afraid of the fact that we don't know everything today. This will come over time. It should not freeze us, it should not hinder us, but we should also be confident and have hope that solutions will come our way. If we move, there is nothing wrong with little steps, with baby steps, as long as you set many in the right direction.
That's fantastic. Okay, final question from me, and then we'll see if we have any more from the audience. The CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. How do you see that working in the short term as we're sort of still figuring it out? And how do you see it being effective as a way of preventing carbon leakage? Do you see it growing going forward?
I will take a rain check on this one.
Nothing. Not just say it's going to be great.
But we will, the 1.5 that we decided with the world in Paris is a global effort. So that means that everyone needs to be on board. So we cannot afford not having something like CBAM. We should avoid carbon leakage. We cannot. I do think that we can move in different paces around the world. So it's okay that some are faster and some are slower. But avoiding carbon leakage is a floor, so that we can reach our climate objectives.
Yeah. Do you think it will encourage countries outside the EU to move faster on their
Absolutely.
even developing countries that may see this as an imposition on their economic growth?
So we should also protect industries that make audacious investment decisions. Like, for example, ArcelorMittal decided to invest 1.2 billion euros in the Belgian plant. It will cut their emissions in half by 2030. And this is a huge investment decision. And if companies and industries are taking these decisions, they also need governments at their side to protect these investments.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, we have no more questions from the audience, and I've gone through everything I wanted to ask you. Is there anything that we've missed that you really want to touch on before we close out this hour?
No, it's okay. I'm happy to.
Well, thank you so much for answering a number of challenging questions. We really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone in the audience for tuning in. Wonderful to see some people here in person, and wonderful for all the people out in Zoom land. And thank you for all of the questions we got. Madam Minister, thank you again for sharing the strategies that you and Belgium have developed to work to decarbonize Europe's energy supply, also along with the partner countries in the EU and the group of 3 other countries that are working in the North Sea. That's really, really remarkable. I'd like to thank the Embassy of Belgium of the United States for their assistance in organizing this event, and particularly Michel I'm going to butcher this, Walamak and Gilles Landsberg. I'd also like to thank the Global Energy Center team for helping to put this event together, including David Yellen, Joe Webster, Will Tobin, Rebecca Mencham-Nance, Lisi Bowen, and Jasper Gilardi. This presentation will be available on the Atlantic Council website, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, so please do share it with your colleagues. And then we want to encourage you all to tune in to our 7th annual Central and Eastern European Energy Security Conference on June 14th, which will be here at the Atlantic Council, but also live on Zoom, YouTube, etc. at 9:30 a.m. Eastern, again, June 14th. Thank you, everybody in the audience, for joining us. And Madam Minister, thank you again.
And thank you. You mentioned a lot of people. You forgot yourself. So thank you for hosting us.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.